Kajihiro. He's a professor at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, and teaches courses in ethnic studies and geography and environment. He's also the co-founder of the Hawaii Detours Project, which aims to teach people the true history of Hawaii and spread awareness of social justice issues from a decolonized perspective. He is an authority on the militarization of Hawaii. Kyle's PhD thesis was on the Hawaiian island of Ko'olawe, which had been bombed for decades by the US military and was finally returned to the people of Hawaii because of courageous citizen activism. He's a board member of Hawaii Peace and Justice. Kyle, please go right ahead.
Aloha kako. Warm greetings and solidarity from Kanaka Maoli lands in the US occupied Hawaiian Islands. I want to thank Anne Ray, Colleen Kelly, and for the invitation to speak with you all. And also the Veterans for Peace for all the amazing work that you do for being a voice for peace and social justice. And thanks to my fellow panelists, it's an honor to be with so many rock star activists. So I hope I do everyone proud. Let's see. So let me, if I could share my screen here. Can y'all see that all right? Okay. So in 2011, when the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit met in Honolulu, President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton unveiled the administration's big foreign policy decision, the so-called Pacific Pivot. It called for a rebalance of US military and political power from Europe and the Middle East to the Pacific region. Meanwhile, representatives of civil society groups and social movements in Hawaii, Asia, and Oceania met in a parallel event called Moana Nui. Moana Nui means the great deep ocean. It was a recognition of the oceanic connections which nurture our solidarities. Several hundred of us marched to Waikiki to deliver our message to APEC delegates, only to be met with barbed wire and armed patrols. Waikiki had been turned into a militarized green zone. The media gave extensive coverage to Obama's policy announcement, but those of us protesting outside knew that the pivot was nothing new. The United States pivot to the Pacific began in the late 19th century when US military and political leaders looked across the Pacific Ocean and with desire for China's riches. Today, China continues to loom large as the United States' central obsession, but this time as a military and economic competitor. Despite pledging to downsize US foreign military commitments, the Trump administration continued Obama's pivot and even dredged up racist yellow peril themes to fire up his supporters. And the pivot continues with the Biden administration and the US Indo-PACOM's $20 billion regain the advantage wish list to counter what it calls the hyper-competitive rivalry with China. Every pivot needs a fulcrum, the stationary point upon which a lever turns. A fulcrum does invisible work, excuse me, by magnifying the force applied to the lever, which enables it to lift heavy objects. Hawaii has been and continues to be an important fulcrum of the United States Pacific pivot. Indiana Senator Albert Beveridge here lays out most clearly the imperial ambition driving this move. The Pacific Ocean is our ocean. The power that rules the Pacific is the power that rules the world, and that power is and will forever be the American Republic. But in order to achieve such a goal, military planners set their sights on Hawaii. They needed stepping stones to get across the Pacific Ocean. Between 1872 and 1873, General John Schofield led a secret military survey of the Hawaiian Islands, posing as tourists, with orders to identify a suitable location for a naval coaling station. He reported, "It is, quote, it is the key to the Central Pacific Ocean. It is the gem of these islands, valueless to them, to Native Hawaiians, because they cannot use it, but more valuable to the United States than all else the islands have to give." The geographic feature described by Schofield was Keawalau o Pu'uloa, the original name for what people today know as Pearl Harbor. It is a broad estuary fed by streams and springs from the Ko'olau and Waianae mountain ranges. Because of the abundant fresh water, shallow sunlit bays, and fertile soils, it was a major food producing area for Kanako Iwi on Oahu. They called it Aina Momona, or fat or abundant land for the agriculture and aquaculture production. Unfortunately, today, most people only know this place as a sign of war. In order to access Keavalauloa, US officials conspired with white settlers to land American troops to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani in 1893. President Cleveland considered it an act of war against a peaceful and friendly nation. According to historian Stephen Kinzer, Hawaii was the United States' first regime change. Despite two successful campaigns by Hawaiian nationals to defeat a treaty of annexation, the Spanish-American War in 1898 gave the United States the opportunity to seize Hawaii as a wartime necessity without a legal transfer of sovereignty or the consent of the Hawaiian people. The militarization of Hawaii expanded with each subsequent war, reaching a high point of military landholdings during World War II. In 1947, the Pacific Command was founded, now the US Indo-Pacific Command, which is the oldest and largest of the unified commands. Its area of responsibility spans more than half the surface of the planet and encompasses most of the world's population, going from the west coast of North America to the central Indian Ocean, and from Alaska all the way to and including the entire continent of Antarctica. The Hawaiian scholar and activist Kale Kajihiro asked the nuclear-free and independent Pacific delegates in 2007 to imagine the military in Hawaii as the head of a monstrous he'e, or octopus. The head of this he'e is approximately 142 military sites encompassing nearly 225,000 acres of land, 60% of which are the occupied Hawaiian national lands of the Hawaiian Kingdom. On the island of Oahu, nearly 25% of the island is occupied by the US military. The brains of this octopus can be thought of as the command center, the supercomputers, and the fiber optic network nervous system that connects everything together. The eyes of this he'e are the military radar installations and space tracking facilities on various mountaintops, which enable it to see. These include Space Force Tracking Station at Haleakala on Maui, missile defense radars at Kaena Point and Koke'e on Kauai, the multiple roving eyes, including drones, satellites, and the giant sea-based X-band radar, which periodically docks at Pearl Harbor. The ears are a network of listening devices arrayed across the islands, including the National Security Agency's Regional Signals Intelligence Center under former pineapple fields near Wahiawa. This is where NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden worked before exposing illegal government spying on electronic communications of its citizens. The excrement of this he'e consists of the multitude of negative military impacts on the environment and society. These include nearly 1,000 military contamination sites at active and former military bases. These sites contain a toxic cocktail of depleted uranium, unexploded ordnance, chemical munitions, heavy metals, solvents, and petroleum products. The Navy's Red Hill fuel tanks were built during World War II and have leaked hundreds of thousands of gallons of jet fuel over the years. 20 of these giant underground fuel tanks, deteriorating and leaking with a capacity of 12.5 million gallons each, are perched 100 feet above an aquifer, which supplies 25% of Honolulu's drinking water. It's a ticking environmental time bomb. The excrement of the he'e also includes the destruction of cultural sites and resources, the taking of land, and the suppression of civil liberties. This is a golf course at Kaneohe Marine Base, which is one of the largest Hawaiian burial grounds in the islands. It includes the taking of civil liberties and land, the forced cultural and political assimilation of Kanako Iwi and other peoples in Hawaii, various accidents, violence against women, the economic dependency on military spending. The military spends approximately 7.8 billion per year, or 9.8% of Hawaii's GDP. And so while some get paid handsomely in the military economy, others pay the price. In particular, Kanako Iwi pay the highest price in terms of lost sovereignty, land, culture, and economic opportunities. And the tentacles of this he'e reach out across the Pacific to grasp at islands and peoples within this region. These include military bases in Guam, the Northern Marianas, Okinawa, Japan, the Marshall Islands, the Philippines, Korea, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Australia. At many of these sites, powerful social movements oppose US military bases and activities. However, as fishing people know, when the tentacle of a he'e is severed, a new one can grow in its place. For example, in the Philippines expelled US bases in 1992, but US troops returned under George Bush's global war on terror to assist with counterinsurgency operations in Mindanao. And more recently, with China's aggressive military buildup in the South China Sea, the US military has expanded its access and use of Philippine military sites. After the 1995 rape of a 12-year-old Okinawan girl by US Marines, resistance to US bases erupted in Okinawa and forced US base troops to realign its base and force structure. This led to new coral reef destroying bases in Okinawa, the destruction of limestone rainforests and cultural sites in Letexan in Guam, and expanded troop rotations in Australia, as well as a 2,700 troop increase in Hawaii. As Kalekoa reminded NFIP delegates in Tonga, the best way to neutralize an angry, writhing he'e is to bite it in its head, or to use less violent imagery by neutralizing its destructive powers. So in Hawaii, we've had two sets of kuleana, or responsibilities, to confront the violent militarization of the land and people here, but also to counter the consequences of military activities and wars that emanate from Hawaii and affect people throughout the region. So one of the seminal struggles was the Kaho'olawe movement, which began in 1976 and it succeeded in 1990 to stop the bombing of Kaho'olawe Island. This movement, based on the idea of aloha aina, to love the land, to care for the land, spread to Makua Valley on Oahu, which is an ongoing struggle that we have. It also has moved to Pohakuloa on Hawaii Island, right at the base of Mauna Kea. And one of the campaigns we're engaged in right now is to end 4 leases that the US Army has with the state of Hawaii, encompassing 30,000 acres at Pohakuloa, Makua, Kahuku, and Puamoho. Each of these leases is $1 for 65 years, and they end in 2029. So we're in a campaign right now to try to stop that. Also, the Rim of the Pacific exercises, or RIMPAC, are the largest multinational exercises that happen every 2 years in Hawaii, alternating with the Talisman Sabre in Australia. So we've joined forces with movements in Australia to oppose and protest these war games. And this is just what happens with RIMPAC at some of the sites. So I want to just close with this image of kipuka. The Hawaiian word kipuka means an opening or an oasis. It can be a forest in the middle of a lava field that becomes a source of new life. And so kipuka aloha aina are these openings of struggle, of resistance, and of new futures that emerge in times of these social movements. The Mauna Kea movement on Hawaii Island was a kipuka aloha aina. And like the forested kipuka, they spread seeds which then regenerate life on the lava field. So I just want to close with the image of, let us join for, let our kipuka aloha aina from our various islands regenerate hope, life, and struggle for peace and justice that threaten to the monstrous he'e, which threatens to devour our region. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Kyle. That was an excellent, excellent presentation on what is going on here in Hawaii. We thank you very much, and for all your activism. Kyle is one of the most active of all of our folks, and has been for many, many years, as he was the director of the American Friends Service Committee office for Hawaii and the Pacific for many years, until unfortunately AFSC had to close some offices. So thanks so much, Kyle. We really appreciate it. Thank you.